Sorry for that delay. We were having a couple issues getting the preview to make it look like we're actually live, which we are. Come up here. Thanks everyone for joining us again today for another edition of the Let's Go Tribe off-season Q&A. I'm Matt Schlichting. I'll be your host today. I will get to the questions that we have here. Thanks everyone who took the time to submit some before things got started today. Not much happened this week as far as real baseball news goes for the Indians. It happens sometimes. We're really in the doldrums now where counting the days down until pitchers and catchers report. Really looking forward to that being a thing again soon. So, just trying to survive. It's the last time I checked like 8 degrees where I am, which is wonderful. Really excited about that. Couple of things to start with. One, Yandy Diaz, who I've been a strong supporter of the free Yandy movement. Yandopolis, if you will. He had been in the Venezuelan Winter League, which a lot of rookies, younger players, do spend some time down there in the middle of the winter. He had a minor wrist injury. Turns out it was nothing, not anything particularly wrong with him. It's just one of those things where they recalled him from the Winter League because when you've got a guy that young, it's the off season. It's not particularly something that you want someone to push that hard. Bring him back. You don't want to mess around at all with somebody getting hurt. What he was doing before that in 29 games, though, was disgusting. He hit .357 with an on-base of .433 and a slugging percentage of .491. That's good. And it's the VWL. It's not like he's facing the rest of the American League Central's pitching staffs here. But we've seen this kind of line from him everywhere in the minors. We're seeing it again in a development league. It's looking more and more to me like he's going to be able to come up and immediately contribute to things. I am thrilled at that prospect, and I really, really want to see him have a great spring so he can start the season with the team. One other thing here is that he was popping up in some trade rumors. Given that the Indians need help at the corners and in the outfield, I don't think it makes a lot of sense for them to trade him unless they get just a stupidly good offer for it. In that case, anytime somebody decides to give you too much for a player, go for it. Just do it. We'll go ahead and get to the questions that were submitted beforehand here. On Facebook, Connor Douglas Semple asks, in the event that the Indians don't end up with Edwin Encarnacion, what thoughts would we have on signing Pedro Alvarez to DH as well? It's not something that I've taken an immediate look at, so I don't want to say anything before I can have a peek at the numbers here in terms of what he's done at the plate the last few seasons. So, coming off his 29-year-old season, last year he hit .249, .322, .504 with 22 home runs and 20 doubles in 109 games with 376 plate appearances. Sounds like he would have, if he had played a full 150, 145 games, that sounds like that would project towards a Napoli pace overall. And his last contract here was right around $6 million, so that is in the Indians' wheelhouse in terms of what they're looking to pay for a guy, what they're looking to get from a player who hits at the corners. Again, that's the thing, is I'm not excited at the idea of signing Alvarez. I don't think he's going to be the guy that puts us over the top. I don't think he's going to be a guy that significantly improves the team. And I think he'd have to play a lot of DH because he's not good defensively. That being said, if it's going to be sort of a weird platoon at DH and first, where Brantley sees some time at DH, Santana sees some time at first and DH, and Alvarez sees some time at DH and first base. Sure. It's just... I just want them to go get Edwin, which kind of rolls into the next question here. From Alex Keene, what do we think the Indians actually offered Edwin Encarnacion? I would think that Edwin is still looking for something to at least match the $80 million 4-year. I think that's the right numbers. Yeah, because it was $20 million a year that the Blue Jays offered, that he ended up turning down. And still, the market for first base DH types is yet even thinner. I saw earlier that the White Sox and Jose Abreu agreed to a 1-year contract. I believe that's true. Yeah. Well, I guess he was in arbitration anyway, but that signals that the White Sox they're probably not going to be moving him. He had come up in some trade rumors. I don't think that they would go and give him a $10 million 1-year deal and avoid arbitration if they were seriously considering trading him. Or maybe that is what they needed to do to have another team say, hey, look, it's a contract. You don't have to do the negotiation either. Maybe they'll flip him in the middle of the year. But the key is, we're still in the off season. He's got to land somewhere. I don't necessarily think he has any reason to stay in Toronto because he's not going to get a better offer from the Blue Jays at this point than he already has. I think there's a chance another team might go for the long ball and match it or go a little bit higher, but I would think that the Indians would have put something together that would have been like 3 years. I can't imagine them offering anything more than about $14 million per year. But it's possible that they would front load it too and give him a player option. Whatever it is, it's probably a really weird, strangely creative contract because I don't see them ripping the purse open to go, here's $22 million a year for 2 years. I think that's the right thing to do if he would be willing to sign a 2-year contract, but there was a really good post I saw, a really good article someone wrote just outlining Encarnacion makes sense for the Indians make sense for Encarnacion. It's just financially, he's probably worth more that the Indians can offer him. And unless he gets to the middle of January and still hasn't landed anywhere, and it's just like, I don't want to think about this anymore. I want to sign a contract and know where I'm going to go and play for a contender. I think that's the only situation where the Indians can really step in and go, Edwin, we have all of those things. Come to us. So, who knows what they're going to do? I'm sitting here in an apartment in Chicago as opposed to the front office of a major league team. My insights and thoughts are probably to be taken with a grain of salt. Maybe they are going to recognize this next season in particular might be the best shot in the next 5 or 6 years, so go for it. Damn the consequences if it doesn't work. At least you can point to the fans and say, look, we didn't let it get away. On to the next question. Paul Robert Baltzer wants to know, has there been any franchise dialogue at a realistic logo brand change? I love the Chief, but realize the racism. If we were to drop the Chief, we would need to, in my opinion, change mascot names entirely. The question, to what? I don't want to go too deep into it today, but I am working on a post later in the week with a suggestion for a new team name, a new mascot, and a couple of other things. So look for that probably on either Tuesday or Wednesday. There was more news recently, and I don't want to get into it here, but the New York Post had reported that the Indians were phasing Chief Wahoo out more. It had turned out that they were misinterpreting the earlier report that the Indians were just getting rid of the cream uniforms, which I believe the editorial opinion of everyone except Merritt Rolfing at Let's Go Tribe is that that's a great thing because the cream uniforms sucked. It's not the worst uniform in baseball by a long shot, but compared to the Navy and compared to the other alternates, they just weren't as fun. They weren't as nice. And I think the Indians' record in them was actually 1-54. I'm pretty sure that's an accurate statistic as well. So it's good for everybody that they're gone. But it ended up just being something that, as news like this tends to, it started to pick up some steam on social media. It ends up landing on Breitbart. From there, it ends up on Reddit. So that was a really interesting news day. It was just fun seeing some of the Indians beat writers going, here's the thing I posted 3 weeks ago explaining what this actually is. Read. On to the next questions. R. Cantrelli on Twitter, at R. Cantrelli, wants to know, do we think with a miserable start, I'm assuming that's what he means by ST here, Salazar could find himself pitching out of the bullpen like Bauer last year? Furthermore, do we think that Bauer could find consistency as a starter this season? We'll start with the Salazar question. One start, I don't think is going to push Salazar out of the rotation. My hope is that since he got some work here in the postseason, he got to pitch a little bit in the World Series towards the very end there, and certainly looked like he had his stuff and was throwing hard. I'm hoping the offseason gives him enough time to rehab so that they're not going to pull him early or move him to a relief role because of injury concerns. That being said, if it's a performance thing, I think he'd have to have a month of April like Cody Anderson did, where every time he comes out to pitch, by the third or fourth start, it's like, okay, well, the Indians need to score 8 runs today to stay in the game. I don't see Salazar having that sort of meltdown. I do think that the first half Salazar this past year showed what he's capable of. That's the type of pitcher that we might be able to see in the future. There were questions that came up about his work ethic around the All-Star break that perhaps, and we of course don't have all the full details because it was something that was in the clubhouse with Callaway and some of the other pitching coaches, but just suggesting that maybe he was resting on his laurels a little bit, was enjoying the success, which everyone should, but wasn't quite as hungry and fired up as he might have been at the beginning of the year. If we can get a full season of that kind of effort and that kind of desire to be the best from him next year, you look at his pitches, his changeup especially, no one in the game can hit him if he reaches his full potential. But I think that's another reason why the Indians might be patient with him early on. Although I guess the flip side is to consider that they're going to have guys like Clevenger. They're going to have, I can't remember, Ryan Merritt, that are knocking on the door already. And in a lot of other organizations, they could be a number 5 guy starting the year. For the Cincinnati Reds, I think that they would both be ace candidates because they don't have any pitchers. Poor Reds. That's a whole other tangent that I'll stay away from for now. But it would take a really, really bad month. Kind of like Tomlin had. I think it was either July or August, or like that 30-day stretch between the middle of those months where the Indians put him, let him take a game off, brought him in the bullpen once, let him refocus and get going again. The other half of the question here about Bauer, we had the same sort of questions last year, and he ended up coming out of the pen. I don't know, and I have an alarm going off, so I'll be right back. Sorry. I had forgotten that I was cooking beans. This is not a joke. It's serious business. Man's got to eat. Back to Bauer. I kind of think we know what he is at this point, and that's going to be a guy with all the skill in the world, a number of pitches that could grade out at plus if he continues to work on them, but for one reason or another, whether it's up here or it's just mechanically not being quite as consistent from pitch to pitch, I'm not sure. It's just frustrating because we see some of his pitches and we know it's ace stuff. It's, especially when he's got his curveball working, it's one of the nastiest curveballs I've seen in a while. And when he doesn't have a giant cut on his pinky finger on his pitching hand too, it certainly helps his control. One interesting viewpoint, and I might have brought this up a couple of weeks ago as well, but I think it was the guys on Wahoo, the guys at Wahoo's on First, suggesting that maybe reliever is where he would be most effective, and not like a traditional setup man, and not a closer. Although I think that with Bauer's mentality, like he would eat that up, being the guy who runs out with some crazy song playing in the ninth inning. But we see what Miller did. Maybe make him the right-handed relief ace. Bring him in high leverage situations with 2 out. Give him 2 innings of work. Definitely the way that we use pitchers is evolving in the league, and the Indians certainly, just to do a quick tangent on that, the way the Indians used Miller screwed so many teams over because of how much they're paying closer caliber pitchers this offseason. I don't see how anybody who's going to pitch less than 70 innings a year is worth $15, $16 million. That's me. And I've traditionally hated the entire concept of a closer. I do think that you want to have a good relief pitcher at the end of a game. But teams tend to win games that are quote-unquote close situations most of the time anyway. Part of that is because they're using very good relief pitchers. But even before that became a trend because of Tony La Russa, it was still true. It was more than 90% of the time teams would win games that were a close situation. So, wouldn't necessarily want the Indians to use Bauer that way as a traditional closer, but as a guy who comes in, and look what he did in the Toronto game that was the 19-inning marathon. That was, I think, his best performance of the season. And he wasn't prepared. He didn't know he was going to pitch, but the team called on him, and he answered the call because he's got that kind of swagger and self-confidence to go, great, I'm not warmed up, but I've got it. I can pitch whenever. And even at the end of the game, he's like, yeah, I could throw 100 pitches tomorrow. You love that confidence in a guy, and you may be making him be more, bringing him out of the bullpen when he doesn't have an entire week to sit and think about relative velocities and spin rates. And I'm not saying those things aren't important, but you have to wonder sometimes, does he have too much time to sit there and think about it? Maybe he just needs to go out there and grip and rip it. Just pitch. I don't think he's like full Nuke LaLoosh crazy when it comes to approaching the pitching game. But there's a little bit of that sort of, it's why the Diamondbacks gave him up, basically, is just throw the ball. I love the guy. I'm glad that the Indians have him. There's just moments. A couple other questions have popped up on the feed here. Does anyone know why the players have so much love for the blue alternates? I'm not sure exactly. I think those are the ones, and this was David Wilkerson in the stream. I believe those were the ones they wore for like every single playoff game. I think. If someone knows for sure, that would be great. Yeah. Part of it's the socks for me. Those are some pretty sweet socks. Anything that Lindor can wear to show off his stirrups. Delightful. He also mentions the 75, 77 Indians blue jerseys. See if I can pull a picture of those up because I'm curious. Clearly before my time. But maybe it'll come up. Oh yeah. I would love to see those get used again. This was with the crooked C and sort of the crooked letters that said Indians across the front. I would love to see that as an alternate uniform. Hell, I would even like to see it come back as one of the primary uniforms. It's just, it's a very cool look, I think. And you get the crazy stirrup socks too. So Sox fans, literal Sox fans are happy. You avoid the Chief entirely because it's not on the logo at all. I think that's a good point. David also wants to know, is there reason for ongoing concern about Salazar? I've heard that there's some people around the game that just because of his mechanics, how hard he throws, elbow angle, and his pitch, the type of pitches he throws, there are some people that think he's just going to blow out his elbow again. He's already had Tommy John once, and everyone was a little bit terrified when it came out towards the end of the year that he had pain in the elbow. I think it was August Fagerstrom who wrote an article about that or tweeted about it during the run-up to the postseason, just like underlining where it was another team scout saying, like, we would never trade for him because of that. As far as a pitching coach unit and the development approach goes, I don't know if there's a better team in baseball for him to be with to try and avoid that, like the Indians. Because we know they're open to things like plyo, where you're the driveline baseball kind of approach. Like, they haven't fully embraced it, but we know that Bauer does it all the time. I think that they would be open to doing some alternative things to help a player's elbow stay healthy. The problem is he could go out in the second start of the year, throw it, something weird happens, and then he's done. But let's hope that doesn't happen. I don't think it's something that I don't think it's likely. I wouldn't say that it's going to happen. But my understanding is that there have been people, again, who think it's a possibility. Mark Sheffleton points out that Bauer is a right-handed Miller. Would be interesting. No team can have 4 aces, albeit the Red Sox and the Indians both have 3 now. Yeah, I'm not happy that the Red Sox were able to go out and get yet even more dominant starting pitching. I think on both ends that trade stinks for the Indians because the Red Sox, everyone's now making them the presumptive favorite to win the American League. That'll fire the players up, but realistically, if you see continued improvement from Betts, from Jackie Bradley Jr., from Xander Bogaerts, if their pitchers continue to throw well, they're dangerous. They could win 100 games, possibly. For the Indians, I think, yes. I would say for sure Kluber and Carrasco are proven to be ace-level guys. Salazar's right there. I still think he gives up a few too many walks. And there's, again, we talked a little bit about the injury concerns. We talked a little bit about his maybe mental approach isn't quite there yet. But there are probably half the teams in the league that wouldn't think twice about making him their number 1 guy. So from that point of view, yes. I wouldn't mind if Bauer figured it out and became the 4th ace. It would be awesome. And Mark, again, like I agree. I think the Indians are going to play with a chip on their shoulder, having gone to the World Series and being 1 win away, and now they're being told, you're not the favorites anymore. Sure, you went off and did it. You're getting your best hitter back. And they're going to add a couple of other pieces, but sorry, no. Just not going to do it. There was one other question before I sign off today. I'm remembering. I can't. I think it was just earlier today that it was asked in regards to regression. Here it is. So, D. Evancho on Twitter wants to know, who do we think will have the biggest regression in 2017 and why? And in both directions. One, cratering, not necessarily cratering, but had a great year, will return to what you would normally expect, and then who had an off year, who might bounce back. I've got two answers for players that I think are going to regress in the negative direction. One, Tyler Naquin. We've talked about it a lot, and we saw in the playoffs and in the second half of the year some of that inexperience, utter inability to hit a high fastball. He's going to have a batting average on play below 400 at some point in his career. Maybe he'll be a guy like Trout where it floats around 340 and it's not going to be a 100-point drop-off. But I don't know that it's safe to say that any other center fielder in baseball is capable of hitting the ball as hard as Mike Trout. The other one, and this isn't me suggesting that I don't think he's a great player for the Indians to have, but Brandon Guyer, if you just look at his career numbers and his value over time, he's around like a 1.5 to 2 wins above guy. But what the Indians got from him in 38 games was a career pace that would have been worth like 4 or 5 wins above replacement if it was an entire season. I expect the Indians to keep platooning him and using him where he's strongest, but man, it's not going to be quite that good. He'll still probably get hit by like 30 pitches next year, and he's still going to be a very good option when they can use him in a platoon situation. But I would expect the numbers to not look like 333, 438, 469 for the entire year next year. It's going to be a little bit less than that. He's, for his career, been about 250, 260, 350, 400. That's probably closer to what we're going to get from him. And it's good that these are kind of fourth outfield type guys, potentially, that we're talking about regressing. I wish Naquin would figure it out and be the everyday center fielder, because the Indians don't necessarily know who that's going to be right now. But as far as a bounce back player goes, I'm trying to think of guys who had a down year for the Indians last year, and there's not many really that come to mind. Looks like I'm frozen on the stream now, making a great face. Wonderful. Oh well. I want to look at the numbers here real quick just to get some form of idea. Because if you think about it, last year, Kipnis kind of had a little bit of a bounce back year. The last couple of years, even, for him, have been great. Santana had he had a career year, basically. Jose Ramirez broke out finally and had a great year. And I don't think he's a candidate for regression, because, again, I think you look at his contact rate, you look at his strikeout rate, as far as hitting goes with his gap power, he looks a lot like Brantley does in terms of the numbers and in terms of some of the advanced metrics. So that's exciting. He could come back a little bit. I don't know if he'll be like 4 to 5 wins above again, but it's not going to be like a sophomore slump or something of that nature. I would really hope that it's Yan Gomes, if he can get half of what he was or what we had expected him to be and to become, and that helps the Indians lineup a lot. This was after the playoff run in 2013, where we thought we had a guy who was going to be a 30% better hitter than the average catcher with a plus glove behind the dish, which is a perennial all-star, if that's what that player turns out to be. I know Matt Lyons would love it to be Roberto Perez, who comes and basically doubles his offensive numbers from last season. I don't know if I see that happening either. That's the position that, best case scenario, it just turns out these guys had historically bad luck, which to a certain extent Gomes did. He was right around like 190 on balls in play for the first half of the season. And then he came back in that first game back after his injury, too, and hit a freaking home run. So maybe that's the sign of things to come. Maybe that's the sign. So, other than that, I think we got good years from a lot of guys. I would still love to see Chisenhall start playing well enough to hit from both sides of the plate all the time. He might be a dark horse candidate to play like 30 or 40 games in center field next year too, which would be an interesting thing. I know there's a little bit of concern about his decision making and route running still, but I don't think it's anywhere near as questionable as Naquin's looked in the playoffs. But I think he's just, unfortunately, I don't know that he's ever going to become that high draft pick cornerstone player that people thought he might become. I think we kind of know what we have with him now, so the Chisholm question is basically answered. And other than that, I mean, those seem like the possibilities to me. So, thanks for hanging around today. On Wednesday, if you want, I'm doing a live stream of Out of the Park Baseball on Twitch. We do have a Twitch set up now. I will say that Out of the Park's not the most exciting game in the world to watch someone else play. If you're a huge baseball nerd, which I'm sure that many of you who are still watching are, it can be a lot of fun. But just to give a quick rundown, I simulated to 2024 and expanded the league to add a team in Austin and Portland, and then moved the Rays to Montreal and did a couple other quick things. So there's 32 teams in the league. The Indians in that playthrough won in 2017 and 2019, but then somehow ended up with a payroll that was $100 million above their budget. So I can't, in the playthrough, I can't sign anybody. It's hard to trade anybody, and the team's not very good. So it's like a multi-year rebuild that's going to be going through that. And I ended up having to trade like 3 top players in the off season before even things went underway. So it will be playing games, like simulating games next time instead of me just looking for trades. But if you want to come check that out, that's probably going to be at 9 Eastern on Wednesday, and there will be links. Although I think it's just Twitch TV/Let's Go Tribe. And then there will be, I assume, another podcast tomorrow night as well, if you want to stop by and listen to Matt and Jason go over all of the things that haven't really happened this week. So thanks again for tuning in. I will see you next time. And let's go Tribe, even though there's still 56 days until we get any sort of significant baseball.